Gardner estate had always carried a reputation, whispered about in hushed tones among the townspeople, a reputation that most dismissed as rumor until the day I arrived. From the moment I first set eyes on the property, a sense of something unnatural lingered in the air, a weight that pressed against every thought, as though the land itself remembered the family's misfortunes. The house was set back from the road, framed by overgrown hedges and twisted trees, their bare branches scratching at the cloudy sky like the hands of restless spirits. No one had lived there for decades, yet it seemed alive, as if the walls themselves were holding a breath, waiting. I had come because of curiosity and because of the letters that had appeared mysteriously at my door, unsigned but unmistakably referencing the Gardner family, detailing moments of tragedy, strange disappearances, and a relentless feeling of being watched. They spoke of things that had been forgotten by time, events buried under the guise of normalcy, and yet these notes insisted that the house remembered, that the family's fate had been sealed long before the last Gardner child vanished. The moment I crossed the iron gate, which groaned with protest under my touch, a shiver ran through me. I could almost hear whispers carried on the wind, words I couldn't quite make out, but which felt like warnings meant solely for me. The front door was heavy, blackened by decades of neglect, yet it opened with surprising ease, revealing a dim hallway thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Every step I took echoed through the empty corridors, a stark reminder that though the house was deserted, it had once been full of life, vivid, intense, and ultimately doomed. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and cobwebs hung like lace from the chandeliers, swaying slightly as if moved by invisible fingers. It was then I noticed the first sign that this was no ordinary abandonment. The shadows themselves seemed wrong, clinging in corners, stretching unnaturally, moving just out of the range of vision. I felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed. I moved toward the study, guided by the letter's insistence that the key to the Gardner mystery lay there. The floorboards creaked in protest, each groan resonating like a warning from the past. On the large oak desk, I found an old journal, its leather cover cracked with age. Inside, the handwriting was hurried and sometimes frantic, chronicling events that at first seemed mundane, dinners, chores, letters, but gradually descended into something far more sinister. The entries described noises that could not be explained, shadows that moved independently of light, and a constant presence watching the family. What was striking was the gradual erosion of normality, how each successive entry carried a heavier weight, a sense of despair that built like a storm gathering on the horizon. The journal spoke most vividly of the night the first child disappeared. The entry described the sound of footsteps in the hall, a whispering voice that called the child's name, and a sudden silence so complete it was as though the air itself had fled. Neighbors came the next morning, alerted by the parents' frantic cries, but found nothing except an open window and a trail that led nowhere. From that night onward, the Gardner home had been touched by a darkness that the townspeople could sense, a presence they refused to name, but could not ignore. Families nearby spoke of lights flickering in the windows at odd hours, shadows moving behind drawn curtains, and sometimes the faintest sound of laughter echoing through the night. Though the estate had been uninhabited for decades, I spent hours in that study, poring over each page, each note and sketch carefully drawn by a trembling hand. It became clear that the Gardner family had been aware of the growing malevolence, that they had tried to understand it, to record it, yet were powerless to stop it. There was mention of hidden compartments, secret passages, and even cryptic symbols carved into the walls and floorboards, meant perhaps to protect them or perhaps to contain the darkness itself. The lines between protection and imprisonment were unclear, But the family's fear was unmistakable. It was a fear that had spread like a contagion, infecting each member of the household, eroding their sense of reality, and ultimately shaping their tragic end. The most unsettling revelation came when I examined the family portraits lining the walls. The faces of the Gardner ancestors, frozen in oil and canvas, seemed almost alive, their eyes glinting with unspoken knowledge. It was as though they had witnessed the events, and in some unnatural way, were still aware of the house's presence, even after death. The last portrait, depicting the youngest Gardner child, bore a detail so subtle I almost missed it, a shadow darker than the rest, curling around the figure, as if the child had already been claimed by whatever force haunted the estate. I felt my chest tighten as I realized that the diary and letters were only fragments of a larger story, one that the house itself had recorded, layer by layer, memory by memory, tragedy by tragedy. Night fell quickly, and the house's atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, heavier, and my own movements seemed slower, more deliberate, as though the very floor resisted me. Shadows deepened, coalescing in corners, and behind doors, and the faint whispering returned, closer this time, unmistakable. It was not a sound carried by the wind, but a voice intent on being heard. My skin prickled as I realized that the Gardner family had not just been victims of isolation or misfortune. They had been entangled in something older, something that resented exposure, something that would not tolerate intrusion. By the time I retreated to the main hall, I understood the true weight of what I had uncovered. The house was alive in a sense that transcended biology. It fed on attention, thrived on fear, and preserved memory with a precision that bordered on cruel artistry. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper was deliberate, a testament to the fact that the Gardner family had been ensnared by forces that they could neither understand nor escape. The diary, the letters, the maps, all were warnings for anyone who might dare to trace their steps. I left the hall to the front porch as the first light of dawn broke through the overgrown trees, casting long skeletal shadows across the estate. Even in daylight, the house retained a presence, a subtle but undeniable awareness that I could not shake. The Gardner family's story had been recorded in the walls, in the air, in the very foundation beneath my feet. Their disappearance was not merely a mystery of human tragedy, but the result of a profound, unrelenting force that demanded secrecy, demanded obedience, and ultimately claimed them entirely. As I stepped away from the iron gate, I felt the house's gaze linger on me, a reminder that though I had left physically, its reach extended further than I could ever imagine. The letters, the diary, the faint memories of the family, these were now mine to bear, a responsibility as heavy as the darkness that had consumed the Gardners. The estate receded into the mist, silent, patient, and eternal, holding its secrets tightly as if daring anyone to return. The morning after my initial exploration, I returned to the Gardner estate with a sense of urgency that bordered on obsession. The letters and diary had revealed only fragments, tantalizing hints of the house's influence and the family's growing terror. I had to know more, to understand what had truly consumed the Gardners, and why their fate had remained hidden for so long. As I approached the property, the overcast sky mirrored my unease, heavy clouds pressing down as if they shared the weight of the estate's history. Every step along the cracked pathway felt deliberate, as though the ground itself sought to guide me deeper into the heart of the mystery. The front door, which had groaned ominously the previous day, now seemed to sag under the weight of time and neglect. I pushed it open slowly, half expecting it to resist my intrusion, but it moved with a reluctant familiarity as though it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was quieter than before, the faint sounds of movement absent, yet the oppressive atmosphere remained. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through cracked windows, and the faint scent of old wood and decay filled my senses. I reminded myself that whatever had taken the Gardners was not bound by reason or logic, and that fear itself had been their constant companion. I returned immediately to the study, the apparent heart of the estate's secrets. The journal lay open where I had left it, and I discovered that additional pages, previously hidden beneath the desk, had emerged. They were fragile, yellowed with age, and covered in the same hurried handwriting that conveyed mounting dread. The entries described night after night of strange occurrences, footsteps in empty rooms, objects shifting without explanation, and voices calling the family members from places they could not reach. The language grew increasingly frantic, the sentences fragmenting under the weight of panic and despair. It was as though the writer's mind had been unraveling alongside the events in the house, each day more consumed by a force that no one else could perceive. The journal's entries recounted the next child to vanish, a boy of 7 who had been found days later in the basement, unconscious and muttering words that made no sense. The family had attempted to shield him from whatever had been haunting them, but he had seen something beyond human comprehension. He described corridors that shifted when unobserved, shadows that moved independently of light, and a presence that could not be escaped. Even the most rational moments of his description hinted at something deliberate, something patient and intelligent, shaping the house's horrors in precise, deliberate ways. The parents, despite their love, were powerless, each entry documenting their futile attempts to protect their children while maintaining the illusion of normalcy for the world outside the estate. As I turned the fragile pages, one passage in particular drew my attention, a detailed account of the family discovering a hidden door behind the library shelves. The entry described a chamber that had been sealed for generations, its purpose unknown, yet the writer sensed its connection to the house's malevolent behavior. According to the journal, the Gardner matriarch had been the first to enter, her courage bolstered by desperation and maternal instinct. Inside, the room was filled with artifacts, whose origins were mysterious: ancient symbols carved into stone, old dolls with hollow eyes, and papers bearing incomprehensible sketches. The atmosphere of the chamber was oppressive, almost sentient, and the family's fear intensified with every passing minute. The diary hinted that the room was not just a repository of forgotten things, but a focal point for the darkness that had claimed their lineage. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, I searched the main floor for the chamber, noting every irregularity in the walls and floorboards. Eventually, I found what the diary described: a narrow, hidden seam in the library wall covered by a sagging bookshelf. Pushing it aside revealed a door, its wood splintered yet solid, with carvings eerily similar to those documented in the journal. The air that emanated from behind it was cold and damp, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach twist. For a moment I hesitated, sensing the gravity of crossing a threshold that the Gardners themselves had entered, but never left unchanged. Every instinct warned me that what lay beyond was not meant for the living, and yet the need for answers drove me forward. Inside, the chamber was smaller than expected, its walls lined with shelves containing relics, whose purposes remained cryptic. Some objects appeared ceremonial, others utilitarian, yet each radiated a weight of history and secrecy. On a central pedestal lay a book, bound in dark leather, its pages sealed with wax. I recognized it immediately from the diary, an account of the house's past, chronicling the events that had touched the Gardner family for generations. Each page promised insight into the estate's influence, detailing how the darkness had evolved, how it had interacted with each member of the family, and the lengths to which they had gone to contain it. The descriptions were meticulous, blending mundane observations with terrifying encounters, creating a narrative that was impossible to ignore. As I examined the book, the house seemed to react. A draft swept through the chamber, extinguishing my lantern and plunging the room into shadows that clung to the walls like living entities. I could hear whispers, faint at first, then growing in clarity, repeating phrases I had read in the diary. Do not leave. Do not forget. Do not remember. The words were neither threatening nor comforting, but carried a weight that anchored itself in my consciousness. I realized then that the house had a memory, a consciousness formed over decades, possibly centuries, capturing the fears, hopes, and tragedies of those who had resided within it. It was patient, deliberate, and unyielding, shaping reality according to its own inscrutable design. I spent hours in the chamber, reading passages aloud, trying to understand the mechanisms through which the house influenced the garden. The accounts detailed patterns of disappearances, psychological torment, and familial breakdowns,
all escalating over time. The house seemed to operate not with malice in the human sense, but with a purpose tied to preservation of its own existence. It fed on attention, fear, and memory, ensuring that those who lived within it would never fully escape, even in death. The more I read, the more I sensed the enormity of what the family had endured, the weight of generations trapped under the influence of a force that defied comprehension. When I finally left the chamber, the house seemed quieter, yet the lingering presence was undeniable. I understood that the Gardner's experiences were not isolated, that the house had claimed more than just a single family, and that its influence extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the estate. As I stepped back into the dim morning light, I realized the danger of knowledge, of understanding, and the responsibility that came with it. Every word I had read, every shadow I had witnessed, became part of me, a tether to a story that refused to die. The Gardner family's tragedy was no longer just history. It was alive, waiting to ensnare anyone who dared to uncover the truth. And now, having glimpsed the first layer of their reality, I could not walk away. The estate's whispers followed me as I descended the front steps, each one a reminder that the house was patient, eternal, and ever watchful, and that the story of the Gardners was only just beginning. Returning to the Gardner estate a third time, I felt a mixture of dread and necessity. Each visit seemed to pull me deeper into the house's grip, as if it were aware of my intentions, measuring my curiosity against my courage. The diary and letters had revealed a gradual unraveling of the family, but the hidden chamber had suggested that even more sinister forces had been at work. I needed to understand not only what the Gardners experienced, but why the house had allowed such horrors to persist for generations. The questions clung to me like a second skin as I crossed the threshold once again. The familiar groan of the front door a chilling greeting. Inside, the air seemed thicker, heavy with the residual presence of past events. Dust motes floated in the muted light from the broken windows, illuminated as if to mark their path, tracing invisible lines across the floor. The house seemed alive in ways that defied logic, creaking and settling in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I reminded myself that fear was a tool, a lens through which the family had perceived the house, and through which I too might uncover truths that reason alone could not explain. I moved immediately to the basement, the location of some of the earliest disappearances noted in the diary. The stairs descended in tight, uneven steps, each one groaning under my weight. My lantern cast long shadows that stretched and twisted against the stone walls, echoing the forms described by the family. According to the diary, the basement was not merely a storage space, but a labyrinth, its structure shifting subtly, preventing escape and disorienting anyone who entered. Each passage seemed to exist in a slightly different configuration than the last time, as though the house itself were alive and subtly reshaping its interior to test or trap its occupants.
In the far corner, I found the remnants of what the family had described as the center of the basement horrors. Broken furniture lay strewn across the floor, and strange marks, etched deep into the stone, bore an unmistakable pattern. They were geometric and almost ritualistic, a language of the house written in shadow and stone. I traced the carvings with my fingers, careful not to disturb anything, and felt a cold pulse through my hands, as though the house were aware of my intrusion. The diary had suggested that these markings were tied to each disappearance, functioning like a record or a trigger, amplifying the psychological torment of the family. The deeper I ventured, the more intense the sensations became. Whispers, initially faint and scattered, began to coalesce into words, phrases repeated in a loop. Do not stay. Do not linger. Leave now. The tone was neither threatening nor comforting, but insistent, insidious, echoing the family's own accounts of voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The diary indicated that these auditory hallucinations had been among the first signs that the house's influence was not passive, but was active, interacting with the family's minds, drawing out fear and despair, amplifying their anxieties to the point of physical and emotional collapse. In one passage, the diary described an event that had occurred years earlier. the youngest Gardner child, a girl of 4, had become convinced that the shadows were alive. She spoke to them, naming them, and describing conversations that made no sense to her parents. The family had initially dismissed this as childish imagination, but the diary revealed that the girl had been frightened by more than fantasy. The shadows, it seemed, were semi-autonomous, responsive to perception and attention, adapting to each family member's fears. The house had cultivated this awareness over decades, learning from its inhabitants, manipulating them subtly, ensuring that no member could fully trust their own senses. Following the basement walls further, I found a small alcove concealed behind a false panel. Inside, the remnants of what appeared to be personal items were scattered across the floor. Old photographs, children's toys, and letters marked with dates spanning decades. Each item seemed ordinary at first glance, yet the diary indicated that the house had imbued them with a memory, a tether linking the past inhabitants to the present. The Gardners' experiences were not isolated. The house had absorbed their fears, hopes, and actions, preserving them like echoes that could be summoned and manipulated at will. Handling any object carried the risk of exposure to these lingering memories, which the diary suggested could induce visions, auditory hallucinations, and profound psychological distress. I sat in the alcove, examining a small leather-bound book that belonged to one of the Gardner children. Its pages were blank, yet the diary implied that the house could imprint events onto the surface, selectively revealing images, phrases, or symbols in response to attention and thought. I held the book close, focusing intently, and for a moment, the room seemed to shift. Shadows gathered, forming shapes that mimicked figures described in the diary. The young girl, the lost boy, the parents desperate and confused. The house's presence was palpable, a weight that pressed against the chest, urging recognition of the lineage of suffering it had witnessed and facilitated. The diary's entries suggested that the house's influence was not confined to the family alone. Visitors, staff, and neighbors had experienced inexplicable occurrences, faint at first, escalating in intensity if they lingered. Objects moved, sounds echoed, and the atmosphere thickened, creating a sense of dread so profound that even brief exposure left lasting effects. The Gardner family had attempted to counteract these intrusions, using rituals, locks, and physical barriers, but the diary revealed that the house's influence was adaptable, bypassing defenses with calculated patience. Their attempts, while valiant, were ultimately futile against an entity that had existed and evolved long before their arrival. Hours passed as I documented each feature, each marking, and each sensation. The diary's revelations became my guide, providing context for the shadows and voices that I experienced firsthand. I realized that the house functioned as a living archive, a repository of trauma that interacted with consciousness, capable of shaping perception and behavior. The Gardners had lived their lives within this system, their decisions, fears, and even love manipulated to sustain the house's persistent influence. Understanding this mechanism was crucial, not only for comprehending the family's tragedy, but also for ensuring that their story would not be lost, absorbed silently into the walls that had claimed them. By the time I emerged from the basement, dusk had settled across the estate, casting elongated shadows that stretched from the house into the overgrown yard. The air was cooler, heavier, carrying a hint of the damp stone I had traversed. I felt an unusual fatigue, not just physical but mental, as if the house had siphoned energy in ways subtle but undeniable. The diary's final entries in that section had suggested that even observation could be taxing, leaving imprints on those who dared to witness its power. I understood then the magnitude of what the Gardner family endured daily, the relentless psychological weight imposed by the house's unyielding presence. As I stepped outside, I paused to look back at the estate, its silhouette dark against the fading light. I realized that the house had marked me, woven me into its history. Even as I attempted to chronicle the past, the shadows I had witnessed were not merely remnants of fear. They were living memories, shaped and sustained by generations of human experience. The Gardner family's story was far from complete.
and I sensed that subsequent visits would reveal even deeper layers of interaction between the house and those it claimed. The estate remained silent, yet its presence lingered, a constant reminder that the events documented in the diary were not merely historical. They were active, dynamic, and ready to engage with anyone who dared enter. The shadows, the whispers, the artifacts, all existed in a continuum, an intricate web, linking past and present, victim and observer. And as I left, I could not shake the certainty that the house had already begun to anticipate my next steps, shaping my perceptions and decisions in ways subtle and inescapable. After my encounter with the basement, the house no longer felt like a structure of wood and stone. It felt like a living organism, breathing silently, observing my every movement. The diary had hinted that some of the most disturbing events had occurred not in the rooms everyone could see, but beneath the floorboards of the old parlor and upstairs hallways. The thought of lifting the boards made my stomach churn. Yet I knew that if I wanted the full truth of the Gardner family, I had no choice. The parlor, once a warm and inviting room, now felt suffocating. Dust covered every surface, and the faded wallpaper clung to the walls as though trying to conceal the house's secrets. I removed a chair carefully, dragging it aside to access the first loose floorboard. My hands shook slightly. The diary's accounts of what lay beneath were haunting, and the anticipation made my pulse race. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pried the board loose, the sound of splitting wood echoing through the empty room. A dark void lay beneath, a shallow pit extending further than I had expected. A musty, metallic smell rose from the depths. I leaned closer, lantern in hand, revealing scattered fragments, letters, small trinkets, even fragments of clothing that looked decades old. The diary had described similar collections, remnants of lives disrupted or stolen by the house's influence. It became clear that the Gardner family had been recording what they could, trying to leave a trace of their existence in hopes that someone someday would understand what had occurred. Each item told a story, a small but piercing insight into lives that had been swallowed whole by fear and silence. As I lifted more boards, I discovered evidence of hidden movement patterns, tiny grooves, worn into the wood as if footsteps had pressed repeatedly in specific paths, tracing some unseen ritual. The diary had hinted that the family had been coerced into certain behaviors by the house itself, performing tasks, following directions, and navigating rooms in ways that seemed innocent to the casual observer, but were deeply controlling in practice. The house had a way of measuring, evaluating, and manipulating its influence, subtle yet unyielding. Among the debris, I found a series of letters that had never been mentioned in the diary. These were personal notes, written by the Gardner children themselves, describing fears so vivid they seemed almost to leap off the paper. One letter, from the eldest daughter, recounted hearing voices calling her name at midnight, whispering threats and promises in a language she could not fully understand. She wrote about shadows moving independently of light sources, objects disappearing and reappearing, and the chilling sensation of being watched even when alone. Her words conveyed a mixture of terror and resignation, a knowledge that the house was always aware, always patient, always waiting. I moved next to the hallway upstairs, where the floorboards were warped and uneven. Carefully lifting them, I discovered another cache of personal effects, small toys, a worn teddy bear, and notebooks filled with sketches. The illustrations were surreal, depicting forms that seemed to emerge from shadows, elongated figures with faceless heads, reaching hands and twisting limbs. The diary had suggested that these sketches were not merely creative expressions of children isolated in fear, but attempts to represent the semi-autonomous entities that interacted with the family. These shadows, the house's primary agents, had been present in every aspect of daily life, guiding, threatening, and recording reactions. I paused to consider the implication. The diary's accounts, the artifacts, and the floorboard discoveries all suggested that the house operated on multiple levels. It was architectural, psychological, and almost supernatural in its manipulation. The Gardner family had been trapped within this complex web of control for decades, their fear reinforced by both tangible and intangible elements. Each board, each artifact, each shadow was part of a carefully maintained system, ensuring that no one could escape unscathed. The diary had hinted at one of the darkest aspects of the house, the presence of memory imprints. Objects beneath the floorboards, letters and toys had absorbed the family's experiences, retaining echoes of terror, sorrow, and sometimes fleeting moments of joy. I could feel these imprints as I touched the items, a subtle hum in my fingertips, a shiver down my spine. The house had effectively archived the family's existence, and it used these memories to continue shaping the environment, perpetuating the cycle of fear for anyone who came after. Hours passed as I methodically examined each hidden compartment. I documented the letters, the drawings and the fragments, trying to piece together a timeline of events. The pattern was harrowing. The house had claimed its influence, slowly isolating the family, amplifying paranoia, and ultimately creating an environment where even the most rational mind questioned its own perception. The diary had described this escalation in meticulous detail, but seeing the physical evidence made the horror palpable. It was one thing to read about fear. It was another to witness the artifacts of lives lived in constant terror. The silence of the house was oppressive as I worked, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood or the distant hum of the wind through broken windows. I imagined the Gardners, moving through these same hallways, performing rituals under duress, hiding objects, and writing notes in secret, all under the oppressive gaze of the house. Their isolation had been absolute. The diary recounted neighbors' accounts of odd behavior, lights appearing in empty rooms, fleeting glimpses of children at odd hours, and unexplained noises that kept the entire area on edge. The house had not only consumed the family, but it also affected the wider environment, a subtle, omnipresent force of dread. As I replaced the boards and descended from the hallway, I reflected on the cumulative weight of the discovery. The diary, the artifacts, and the architectural manipulations all confirmed that the Gardner family's experiences were neither random nor coincidental. The house had orchestrated a meticulous campaign of psychological domination, ensuring that fear, confusion, and despair became constant companions. It had preserved every moment, every reaction, and every attempt at resistance, ready to deploy them as needed to continue its influence. I left the house as the sky darkened, feeling an unusual heaviness in my chest. The diary and the artifacts had revealed the mechanisms of the curse in haunting clarity, but they also served as a warning. The house was more than a collection of rooms and walls. It was a sentient archive, capable of extending its influence across time and generations, drawing in those who dared to uncover its secrets. And while I had taken only a fraction of its hidden truths, I could not escape the sense that my journey with the Gardner estate was far from over.
The attic had always held a certain fascination for me. From the earliest moments I had spent in the Gardner house, I felt an unspoken pull toward the topmost floor, a sensation that something significant lingered above the creaking rafters. Unlike the basement or the hallways beneath the floorboards, the attic seemed less about physical manipulation and more about memory, history, and a lingering consciousness of the Gardner family. With the diary clutched tightly in my hand, I began the slow, careful ascent of the steep wooden stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion into a space long abandoned and guarded by time. As I entered the attic, I was greeted by a dim, filtered light, streaming in through small, grimy windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, creating the illusion of tiny spirits dancing in the air. The space was cramped, sloped, and filled with relics of a family whose existence had been meticulously archived yet tragically fragmented. Old trunks, broken furniture, and stacks of yellowed newspapers were scattered throughout, each object appearing untouched yet charged with unseen energy. I could sense the weight of decades pressing against me, the accumulated fear and secrecy of generations barely held at bay by cobwebs and cracked wood. The diary had hinted at a hidden section within the attic, a place where the Gardner children had stored personal items too sensitive or dangerous to remain in the main house. According to the entries, this was where they recorded confessions, fears, and knowledge of the house's manipulations. A secret archive maintained in an attempt to preserve some sense of truth and self, even under constant surveillance. The notion sent chills through me. I realized that this attic might hold some of the most intimate and horrifying details of the family's lives. Moving carefully among the clutter, I found a small trapdoor concealed beneath a tattered rug. My heart raced as I pried it open, revealing a dark cavity lined with wooden planks. Inside lay boxes and bundles tied with string, each labeled in a child's hesitant handwriting. I removed the first bundle, untying the knots with deliberate care, revealing letters, sketches, and journals. The pages were fragile, the ink faded, yet the words screamed with urgency and fear. Each entry seemed to carry the vibrations of the writer's voice, trembling with emotion across decades. One journal, written by the middle child, described a sequence of nights where the house seemed almost alive, its walls breathing and whispering. Shadows moved independently, and objects shifted when no one was looking. The child's accounts included meticulous diagrams of the rooms, markings indicating safe pathways and zones of activity, as if navigating a battlefield rather than a home. There was an intensity to the writing, a mix of terror and determination, showing that even in fear, the family had sought to exert control wherever possible. The attic also contained sketches of figures that seemed to merge with the architecture of the house itself. In one drawing, a staircase appeared to twist impossibly into the ceiling, with ghostly hands reaching from the walls to grasp at anyone ascending. Another depicted the family's silhouettes trapped inside the walls, their faces blank but their eyes wide with silent screams. These illustrations were not mere imaginings. They conveyed the children's perception of the house as a living, conscious entity, capable of manipulation, observation, and judgment. Among the boxes, I discovered small trinkets, a cracked porcelain doll, a locket containing a faded photograph, a toy soldier missing its arm. Each item seemed to resonate with memory, as if the lives of those who had touched them had been absorbed into the objects themselves. The diary had mentioned this phenomenon, describing it as a form of psychic residue. I could feel it now, a subtle hum in the air, a weight pressing down, making my presence known in a place that had been untouched for decades. As I carefully sorted through the bundles, I began to piece together a pattern. The Gardner family had lived under a system of strict, unrelenting fear. The house had dictated behaviors, influenced thoughts, and ensured that even moments of potential escape were fraught with danger. The attic, however, represented a fragile form of resistance. By documenting their experiences, hiding personal items, and preserving memories, the children had attempted to create a sanctuary within the house itself, a place where truth could survive even if their own lives were consumed. Time seemed to distort as I worked. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. The attic's atmosphere blurred the boundaries of temporal reality. The diary's entries guided me, offering context and insight, yet the objects themselves spoke in a language of their own. There were clues of interactions with unseen forces, small scratches, impressions in dust, items arranged deliberately, or shifted subtly. I realized that the house, though abandoned by the living, remained vigilant, observing even my careful movements and silent exploration. One bundle in particular drew my attention, a series of letters written by the youngest child addressed to no one in particular. The letters revealed a depth of understanding that was almost uncanny, as though the child had recognized the house's true nature and its ability to shape reality around them. Each letter carried an air of both resignation and defiance, acknowledging the presence of malevolent forces, while asserting the child's own consciousness. The writings were haunting, a blend of innocence and precocious insight that made the attic feel alive in a profoundly unsettling way. I spent the remainder of the day in the attic, meticulously examining and recording each artifact. With every item, the story of the Gardner family became clearer, a lineage trapped by fear, manipulation, and supernatural influence, yet capable of moments of courage and resilience. The diary had provided a roadmap,
but the attic offered the emotional core, the faces, the toys, the sketches, the letters that made the family's plight undeniable and deeply human. As dusk settled outside, casting long shadows across the attic floor, I gathered the bundles and carefully replaced the trapdoor. The house seemed to exhale as if acknowledging my respect and diligence, yet I could not shake the feeling that I was being observed. The attic's secrets were vast and complex, and I had only begun to understand the depth of what had occurred within these walls. The discoveries left me with more questions than answers. How much of the family's suffering was orchestrated by the house itself? How much could be attributed to human fear, imagination, and isolation? And most importantly, what remained hidden, waiting silently for the next person to uncover it? I knew that my journey was far from complete. The attic had provided a glimpse into the Gardner family's inner world, but the full story was yet to be revealed, waiting in the shadows of the house and the fragments of memory preserved in the objects they had left behind. After spending hours in the attic, absorbing the Gardner children's fragmented records, I descended to the main floors of the house with a mixture of awe and dread. The diary had guided me to the attic, but it had also hinted at another truth. The house itself was not simply a building. It was an active, almost sentient presence, aware of every step taken within it. The walls whispered constantly, and though their language was elusive, I began to notice patterns in their murmurs, like fragments of conversation from a time long past. The first room I entered after leaving the attic was the parlor, a space once meant for warmth and gathering, but now cold and oppressive. Dust blanketed the furniture in a suffocating layer, and the sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-covered window. As I moved across the floor, I felt the house responding, a subtle shift in air pressure, a faint vibration through the floorboards, as if it were acknowledging my presence. The diary had warned me, do not underestimate the power of the walls. They record, they remember, and they do not forget. I leaned close to the peeling wallpaper and listened. Faint whispers emerged, almost inaudible at first, like distant echoes of laughter and cries. I could not make out the words clearly, but the tone was unmistakable, an undercurrent of warning and the house was alive with memory, and the memories were not benevolent. They carried the imprints of generations, each family member leaving behind traces of joy, sorrow, and terror. It became clear that the Gardner family's fate was intricately linked to the house's will, and any intrusion into this space must be approached with extreme caution. Guided by the diary, I moved from room to room, documenting the peculiarities and patterns within the walls. In the dining room, the floorboards creaked under weightless pressure, as if invisible footsteps were following my own. The chandelier swayed slightly, though there was no breeze, and the reflections in the cracked mirrors seemed to shift independently, showing moments of the past that had occurred in that very room. One mirror displayed a scene of the youngest child sitting silently at the table, her eyes wide with unspoken terror, while the adults moved around her in a blur, their faces obscured, their actions tense and deliberate. The library revealed yet another layer of the house's conscious. Books lined the walls in neat, orderly rows, though some had toppled, others had pages torn and scattered across the floor. The diary described the library as the heart of the house's intellect, a place where knowledge and memory coalesce. I noticed faint indentations on the desk, like fingerprints pressed into the surface decades ago, though the desk had been untouched since the family departed. Each object in the room seemed to be part of a living network, the house recording its own history through physical imprints and spectral presence. One particularly chilling discovery was a series of markings along the baseboards, etched carefully by the children in moments of desperation. The symbols were repeated across multiple rooms, forming a map of safe and unsafe zones, exit points, and areas to avoid. The children had attempted to assert some control over the environment, to navigate its dangers, but the markings also revealed the extent of their terror. The house was not merely a passive observer. It actively monitored, influenced, and even manipulated. The Gardner family had learned to survive within these constraints, leaving behind a legacy of coded instructions for anyone brave enough or foolish enough to enter. As I explored the upper floors, I encountered the bedrooms where the children had slept, their tiny beds still in place, though coated in years of dust. In one room, A faint outline of a handprint remained on the wall, pressed into the wallpaper as though someone had leaned against it in silent prayer. The diary mentioned these marks, suggesting that they were not merely physical but imbued with emotion, carrying the weight of fear, hope, and defiance. Standing there, I could almost feel the energy of the children, their resilience in the face of an oppressive and malevolent presence that had stalked their lives. The whispers grew louder as I entered the hallway leading to the master bedroom, a space of both authority and dread. The walls seemed to pulse with anticipation, the very air charged with invisible currents. I could sense a pattern in the murmurs, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the house itself. The diary warned that this floor contained the most dangerous energy, concentrated in areas where the family's authority figures had exerted dominance or fear. I tread carefully, noting every creak, every subtle vibration, every shadow that flickered at the edge of vision. In the master bedroom, I discovered another series of letters, this time from the parents. They revealed a mixture of fear, guilt, and twisted rationalization, an attempt to justify their actions within the house's strange influence. The letters spoke of obligations, secrets kept from the outside world, and the overwhelming pressure of maintaining appearances while the house demanded obedience. The parents' words were haunting in their candor, providing a chilling contrast to the children's whispered warnings etched into walls and journals. By the time I reached the back staircase leading to the basement, I felt the house's presence more acutely than ever. Each wall seemed to breathe, every corner a potential observer. The diary had prepared me for what lay ahead, but nothing could truly ready someone for the intensity of the environment. I realized that the Gardner family had lived every day under surveillance from a sentient structure, their choices influenced, their movements constrained, their voices often silenced. Yet within this oppression, they had found subtle ways to resist, leaving behind artifacts of their humanity in attics, walls, and journals. The exploration left me physically and mentally drained. I paused in the hallway, recording my observations, tracing patterns in the whispers, and attempting to decipher the messages left behind. The house was a labyrinth of memory and malevolence, but it was also a repository of courage, creativity, and survival. The Gardner family had navigated this maze for decades, leaving behind traces that allowed me to reconstruct fragments of their lives, even as the house continued to exert its influence over me. As evening fell, casting long, angular shadows across the walls, I made my way to the front hall. The diary's instructions were clear: document, respect, and never underestimate the consciousness within these walls. I left each room as I had found it, mindful of the delicate balance between observation and intrusion. The house remained alive around me, and I could feel its awareness, a subtle hum beneath the floorboards, through the walls, and in the air itself. The Gardner family's legacy, encoded in whispers, scratches, and faint impressions, had become my responsibility to preserve. Each room, each artifact, each mark on the walls told a story of fear, resilience, and unyielding determination. I understood now that the house's power was not absolute, and that by bearing witness, by recording and sharing their story, I could honor the family's struggle and ensure that the lessons of the past were not lost to time. After my exhausting exploration of the upper floors, I knew the basement, or more accurately what lay beneath it, was the final piece of the Gardner house's intricate puzzle. The diary hinted that the house's most potent memories were stored there, a subterranean network of hidden chambers and forgotten rooms that bore witness to the family's deepest secrets. The air grew colder as I descended the creaking wooden steps, each one groaning under my weight. It felt as if the house itself were daring me to proceed, testing my courage, whispering warnings in a language that only the walls understood. At the bottom of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched into darkness, lit only by the beam of my flashlight. Shadows clung to every corner, and the faint smell of damp earth and mildew filled the air. The diary described this space as the veil between the present and the past, a threshold where the house's power converged. As I stepped forward, I noticed subtle depressions in the floorboards, almost like footprints left long ago, guiding me toward what I assumed would be the first hidden chamber. Each movement echoed softly, yet the echoes seemed to multiply, as if unseen presences were mirroring my step.
I approached the first door, concealed by a thick layer of dust and time, and gently pushed it open. The room was small, almost a closet, but the significance of its contents was staggering. Rows of wooden crates were stacked neatly against the walls, each sealed with wax and marked with faint initials. The diary had mentioned these crates, forgotten artifacts of the Gardner family's life, carefully hidden from the outside world. Some contained personal belongings, others letters, journals, and photographs, each piece imbued with the weight of decades of secrecy. I opened one crate, revealing old letters tied with ribbon. The handwriting was delicate, the ink faded but legible. The letters were a correspondence between family members and even the outsiders they had communicated with. Themes of fear, suspicion, and an almost obsessive desire to protect their privacy dominated every page. It was as if the house had conditioned the family to guard their secrets at all costs, and these crates were a final refuge, a physical manifestation of that ingrained caution. Another crate contained small, intricately carved toys, each coated in layers of dust but unmistakably cherished at one time. The diary suggested that these objects were more than mere playthings. They were tokens of normalcy, a fragile attempt to preserve innocence amidst the oppressive atmosphere of the house. I handled each toy carefully, aware that even the slightest disturbance could upset the delicate balance of history preserved in this subterranean chamber. As I moved deeper into the basement, I discovered a narrow staircase descending further, almost hidden behind a false wall. The diary described this as the Vault of Truth, a space accessible only to those with courage and curiosity sufficient to brave the house's tests. I hesitated briefly, feeling the weight of the house's consciousness pressing down, almost like a physical force, but then I reminded myself of my purpose. I was here to uncover, document, and honor the Gardner family, not to be deterred by the house's intimidation. At the base of the hidden staircase, I entered a large chamber, its stone walls cold and damp. The floor was uneven, marked with faint scratches and indentations, as if someone or something had paced there for decades. In the center of the room lay a massive wooden box, bound with iron and reinforced with locks. The diary warned that this box contained the culmination of the family's secrets, items so potent that their revelation had been deliberately postponed by the previous generation. With trembling hands I approached, feeling a sense of both reverence and fear. The box creaked ominously as I lifted the lid. Inside were objects that defied immediate understanding, photographs of long-forgotten relatives, diaries filled with private confessions, and small objects that seemed to radiate emotion. I pulled out a diary belonging to the matriarch of the family, the handwriting elegant and precise, each word heavy with unspoken anguish. The entries described a life lived under scrutiny, with every action weighed against the house's invisible judgment. The family's attempts at normalcy were repeatedly thwarted, their efforts to escape constantly undermined by unseen forces. The matriarch wrote of nights when the walls whispered warnings, when shadows seemed to stretch and twist with a will of their own, and when the children's cries were silenced not by neglect, but by the house itself. Each entry revealed layers of psychological manipulation, the family's growing awareness of the house's sentience, and the desperate measures they took to maintain control over their own lives. The diary's pages were stained with tears, the physical evidence of emotional strain as real as the spectral presence surrounding me now. I examined another box, which contained documents relating to the property's history, detailing previous owners who had vanished under mysterious circumstance. Patterns emerged, connecting the Gardner family's experiences, earlier tenants who had suffered similar fates. The house was not merely a backdrop for tragedy, it was an active agent, shaping and influencing every generation that resided within its walls. The diary hinted at curses, not in the supernatural sense, but in the weight of memory and psychological imprint left by the structure itself. Time seemed to lose meaning as I documented each artifact, each diary entry, each object that the house had preserved. The whispers in the chamber grew louder, almost guiding me towards certain items, nudging me toward truths that had been hidden for decades. I realized that the Gardner family had relied on this hidden vault to communicate with the future, to leave clues for anyone brave enough to understand. The house had attempted to conceal these truths, yet the family's foresight ensured that their story could eventually be revealed. Exiting the hidden vault, I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and exhaustion. The basement, the hidden chambers, the artifacts, all of it painted a picture of a family struggling against an invisible, pervasive force, determined to survive despite impossible odds. The Gardner family's ingenuity and resilience had allowed them to navigate this haunted environment, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would now allow their story to be told, their voices heard and their secrets acknowledged. As I ascended back to the main floors, I reflected on the journey. The house, for all its power, had been countered by the family's determination to protect each other, to preserve their legacy and to leave markers for the future. The hidden vault was a testament to their courage and resourcefulness, a final message that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the human spirit could endure and leave a trace for those willing to seek the truth. Even after uncovering the hidden vault, the house refused to release its grip entirely. The shadows seemed thicker now, moving subtly along the edges of my vision, always present, always observing. The Gardner family's story had unfolded before me in artifacts, diaries and letters, but the air itself seemed to carry their lingering fear and unease. Each step I took across the worn wooden floors reminded me that the house was not simply a structure, it was an entity shaped by memory, emotion and history, capable of responding to those who entered its domain. I returned to the grand staircase leading to the upper floors where the light from the dusty windows barely pierced the gloom. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting dancing shapes across the wall. I realized that I had grown accustomed to the darkness, to the constant feeling of being watched, yet a part of me remained acutely aware that the house had a way of revealing itself to those who sought the truth. It was not malicious in the traditional sense, but it was an active participant in the unfolding of the Gardner family's tragedy. I paused outside what had once been the nursery, now a room of quiet decay. The crib had collapsed long ago, leaving splintered wood and rusted springs in its place. The diary had described this room as a sanctuary for the youngest members of the family, a place that should have been filled with laughter and play, but the house had intervened, shaping their experiences with invisible hands, ensuring that innocence was overshadowed by tension and unease. I knelt on the floor examining faint scratches and marks that suggested someone had tried to map their movements, as if in an attempt to understand and perhaps predict the house's behavior. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with memory. Faint sounds, barely audible, drifted from the corners, whispers, soft footsteps, the occasional sigh. I knew that these were not hallucinations, but echoes of lives lived under the house's watchful presence. Each generation had been touched by the same subtle manipulations, the pressure of being constantly observed, the weight of inherited fears, and the cumulative impact of secrets hidden and half forgotten. The Gardner family had endured more than anyone outside could comprehend, and these shadows were a testament to that endurance. In one corner, I discovered a small desk that had belonged to the family patriarch. The diary had mentioned that he had spent countless nights at this desk, attempting to document every unusual event, every anomaly and every whisper that the house presented. The papers on the desk were fragile, yellowed with age, but they contained meticulous notes about patterns the house had established, the subtle influences it exerted over behavior, and strategies the family had developed to cope with the oppressive atmosphere. His dedication to recording these events reflected a deep awareness of the house's power, and an almost obsessive need to leave a record for posterity. As I continued my exploration, I came across the study, a room lined with bookshelves that had once held volumes of history, literature, and science. Many books had been destroyed or removed over time, leaving gaps that spoke of both neglect and intentional concealment. The diary had hinted that the study was a place where the family had sought knowledge as a shield, attempting to arm themselves against the incomprehensible influence of the house. I carefully examined the remaining texts, noticing handwritten annotations in the margin. These annotations were personal reflections, thoughts on strategy and philosophical musings, all aimed at understanding the house and surviving within its confines. The family's struggle was not merely against the supernatural or unknown, it was against the psychological weight of generations of secrets. Each family member had inherited not only the physical structure, but the emotional residue of previous inhabitants. The house had become a vessel for accumulated fear, regret and sorrow, and the Gardner family had learned to navigate it with careful observation and rigid routine. Their methods were subtle but effective, documenting every anomaly, establishing safe spaces,
and creating rituals that allowed them to maintain a sense of control despite the house's omnipresent influence. In the attic, I found remnants of childhood memories preserved in boxes and trunks. Old toys, photographs, and handwritten notes told stories of fleeting joy amid the shadows. The diary had emphasized that these items were sacred, tangible reminders of innocence that the house could not erase. I handled each piece with care, recognizing that these were the last vestiges of normalcy for the Gardner children, objects imbued with both nostalgia and resilience. Each artifact represented a small victory against the oppressive atmosphere, a defiance against the subtle manipulations that had shaped their upbringing. The deeper I delved, the clearer it became that the house's influence extended beyond the physical structure. It had seeped into the very psyche of the Gardner family, molding thoughts, decisions, and relationships. Patterns emerged that linked generations, revealing how behaviors and fears were passed down, sometimes explicitly, sometimes unconsciously. The family's survival depended on their ability to recognize these patterns and act deliberately, resisting the house's subtle coercion, while maintaining cohesion and solidarity. Despite the oppressive presence, I felt a profound respect for the Gardner family. Their ability to endure, document, and strategize in the face of an entity that blurred the line between the living and the house itself was remarkable. Each secret preserved, each ritual maintained, each observation recorded was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. They had survived, not by fleeing but by understanding and adapting, leaving behind a legacy that could now be studied, appreciated, and shared. As I prepared to leave, I lingered in the main hallway, reflecting on the journey. The shadows seemed less threatening now, almost reverent, acknowledging my role as witness and chronicler. The Gardner family's story was no longer confined to the walls of the house. It had emerged into the world, complete with the depth, complexity, and emotion that their lives had entailed. The house had claimed its victims, but it had also preserved their legacy, ensuring that their experiences, lessons, and courage would endure. The final diary entry I examined spoke of hope, the quiet belief that the family's story would eventually be understood, that the house's influence could be traced, contextualized, and respected. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, persistence, observation, and courage could create a bridge between the past and the present. The Gardner family had not only survived, they had communicated, leaving a trail for those willing to uncover the truth. The air in the Gardner house felt heavier than ever. As I made my way through the grand hall one final time, every floorboard creaked beneath my feet, echoing the footsteps of the generations who had walked this path before me. It was a strange feeling, almost as if the house recognized the culmination of my investigation, acknowledging that the story it had concealed for so long was finally being laid bare. Shadows clung to the corners of the rooms, lingering in shapes I could not immediately identify, yet there was no malice in their presence, only observation, as though the house itself had grown accustomed to my presence, and now permitted me to see what few outsiders ever could. I paused before the main staircase, the same staircase that had welcomed me at the beginning of this journey. Its wooden banisters were worn smooth, shaped by decades of hands that had gripped them in fear, excitement, or desperation. Each groove and dent carried a memory, a story, a fragment of the lives that had been entwined with this house for decades. I could almost hear the whispers of the Gardner family, carried faintly on the air, speaking of resilience, endurance, and the quiet courage required to survive in a home that had always demanded vigilance. In the master bedroom, I found the remnants of the family's personal lives, the photographs, the journals, and the few pieces of clothing that had survived decades of neglect. Each item told a story revealing the personalities, ambitions, and fears of those who had lived and suffered within these walls. One photograph showed the family gathered in happier times, smiles faintly illuminated by sunlight streaming through the draped window. Another, taken years later, depicted the same faces etched with worry, shadows under their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the psychological weight that had been placed upon them. The contrast was stark, a visual representation of the house's pervasive influence over generations. I moved toward the attic one last time, feeling the pull of history, memory, and unanswered questions. The boxes that had once contained toys, letters, and relics of childhood were now empty or decayed, yet the echoes of laughter, fear, and curiosity seemed to linger in the stale air. Among the debris I discovered a small chest that had escaped prior scrutiny, its lock rusted but intact. Inside were papers and documents, carefully preserved by a Gardner family member who had understood the importance of recording the truth. Each document detailed not only the events that had transpired within the house, but also the strategies, observations and reflections that had allowed the family to endure. Reading through these final documents, I realized that the Gardner family had developed a unique method of coping with the house's oppressive nature. They had created routines, maintained meticulous records, and carved out small sanctuaries of normalcy that provided stability amid the chaos. Their methods were subtle, yet profound, a blend of psychological resilience, keen observation and practical strategy. They had learned that survival was not about confrontation but about understanding the house's pattern, respecting its influence, and navigating its shadows with deliberate care. The story of the Gardner family was at its core a story of human endurance. Each generation had faced the same subtle, omnipresent forces, yet each had found ways to persevere. The house, which might have seemed malevolent or supernatural to an outsider, was simply a repository of accumulated memory and influence, responding to those who lived within it and shaping their lives in ways both visible and invisible. The family's triumph was not in defeating the house, they never could, but in learning to coexist with it, documenting its influence, and leaving behind a legacy of insight for those who came after. As I prepared to leave, I walked through the empty rooms once more, taking in the remnants of a life steeped in secrecy, fear and endurance. I reflected on the lessons this house had imparted, not only to the Gardner family but to me as well. History, memory, and human experience are intertwined in ways that are often invisible, yet their impact can be profound and enduring. The Gardner family had survived because they understood this truth, because they had acknowledged the influence of their environment, and because they had acted with courage, foresight, and unwavering attention to detail. The final room I entered was the study, where the patriarch had spent countless nights recording observations, reflecting on events, and devising methods of survival. The desk was empty now save for a single, carefully preserved journal. Its pages contained the culmination of the family's knowledge, strategies, reflections and guidance intended for anyone who might one day uncover the house's secret. It was a document of hope, resilience, and perseverance, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, even when confronted with circumstances that defy understanding. As I stepped back into the main hall, sunlight began to filter through the grimy windows, casting long beams across the worn floors. For the first time, the house seemed almost welcoming, as if acknowledging that its story had been revealed and that the Gardner family's experiences would now be honored rather than concealed. The shadows, which had followed me since the moment I arrived, receded slightly, revealing the full extent of the space that had both nurtured and tormented its inhabitants. I paused at the front door, taking one final look at the house that had claimed its victims, yet preserved their legacy. The air was heavy with memory, yet there was a sense of closure, of a narrative completed. The Gardner family's story was now part of the world, a cautionary tale, a record of resilience, and a testament to the enduring strength of those who have faced forces beyond comprehension. The house had left its mark, indelible and haunting, but the family's courage, insight and perseverance ensured that their story would endure. I stepped outside, the sunlight warm on my face, and felt the weight of history settling behind me. The house would remain, as it always had, but the shadows would no longer hold the Gardner family's secrets alone. They had been revealed, preserved, and shared, ensuring that the lessons of endurance, observation and courage would live on. The Gardner family's journey had ended, but their legacy would continue to echo through the halls of history, a reminder that even in the darkest places, resilience, knowledge, and courage can illuminate a path forward. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that the world outside the house was forever changed, touched by the silent courage of a family who had survived against all odds, and who had ensured that their truth would never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.